Chicago did not slow down for heartbreak. It never did. Every morning the city woke early, shook off the cold, and pushed forward with the indifferent momentum of a place that had always belonged to people who worked hard and asked few questions. The glass towers caught the light and threw it back across the river, and down on the street below, ordinary lives continued without ceremony. Silas Bennett moved through that city like a man who had learned to carry weight without showing it. He was 34 years old, broad-shouldered, with a face that was composed rather than closed. The kind of face that suggested he had seen enough of the world to stop being surprised by it, but had chosen not to become hard. He dressed simply, even on days when he had no reason to. He drove himself to work. He made his own coffee. And every evening, no matter what the rest of the day had asked of him, he was home by 6. His office occupied the highest floor of a building on Michigan Avenue. The firm was his, built from nothing over 12 years, through decisions that had been both reckless and precise in exactly the right proportions. His name appeared nowhere on the exterior signage. That was intentional. Silas had learned early that quiet power lasted longer than loud power. On a Tuesday morning in late October, his financial director was waiting with a contract worth several $1,000,000. A children's foundation that bore no connection to his name was awaiting his confirmation on a new funding cycle. Silas signed the contract, confirmed the donation without fanfare, sat through the meetings, and said what needed to be said and nothing more. Then he left all of it behind. He stopped at a grocery store on the way home. He bought milk, orange juice, cough drops, and a small container of honey because Owen had been sniffling for 2 days. Owen was 6 years old, small for his age, with eyes that registered everything and a voice that said exactly what was on his mind with a directness that sometimes made Silas feel like he was being gently interrogated by the most honest person he had ever known. The house was large and well kept, but it had the particular stillness of a place where only 2 people lived. Silas set the groceries on the counter, changed out of his work clothes without thinking about it, and reheated leftover soup, while Owen sat at the kitchen table coloring a picture of a house with 3 figures standing in front of it. One was tall. One was small. One was a woman in a yellow dress. Silas looked at the drawing for a moment, then looked away. After Owen was asleep, Silas sat by the window with the city spread out below him, its lights steady and indifferent in the autumn dark. He thought about the last 4 years. He thought about the marriage that had come apart not because of cruelty, but because wealth had quietly rearranged everything, including the woman he had married, including, he sometimes suspected, himself. He thought about the women he had tried to meet since then, and there had been several, and the way each of those evenings had followed the same invisible script. The questions about the penthouse. The eyes sliding toward his watch. The tone that softened and sharpened depending on what he revealed about himself. He was not a man who blamed others easily. He understood that people acted from their circumstances, their wounds, their wants. But he was tired. Tired in a way that rest did not fix, because it was not his body that was worn down but something underneath it. He made a decision that night that he could not fully explain and did not try to. He would go on a few more blind dates. He would go as himself, the real self, the one beneath the asset column. And he would say nothing about what he owned. He would arrive in ordinary clothes, drive an unremarkable car, tell the truth about his life in every way except the financial one. Not to deceive. Not to punish. Only to see what remained when the money was removed from the equation. He did not know yet what that experiment would cost him. The first few dates went the way he had expected, which was to say they went badly in ways that were almost predictable. One woman arrived in a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and spent the first 15 minutes glancing at his jacket in the way people glance at things that disappoint them. She was gracious about it. That almost made it worse. Another was warmer, genuinely funny, and seemed to enjoy herself until he mentioned that Owen came first in every calculus of his life. Something shifted in her expression. Not disgust, just a quiet recalibration, like a door that had been opened a few inches clicking gently shut. A third asked, in a tone meant to sound casual, whether he owned or rented. Silas answered honestly. She ordered dessert and then became unavailable for every follow-up message he sent. He drove home after each evening with the fatigue of a person who has tried to be seen and has instead been evaluated. He did not say much about it to anyone. His younger sister, Claire, was the only person who knew what he was doing, and she had a complicated relationship with the whole scheme. Half exasperated, half convinced it was the most reasonable thing he had ever done. She called one evening to say she had heard about someone. A friend of a colleague. Someone Claire described only as different. Silas told her he was nearly done with the experiment. Claire told him to go on this one last date, and then she would never mention any of it again. He agreed, more to close the subject than because he felt any particular hope. Owen had a question for him the night before, delivered in that guileless way that 6-year-olds deliver questions that happen to be small explosives. He had asked why none of the ladies ever wanted to eat ice cream with them a second time. Silas had not been able to answer that. The rain started around 4 in the afternoon on the day of the date and did not let up. By evening, Chicago looked the way it sometimes did in November, polished and cold and a little merciless, the streets reflecting the street lights in long amber smears across the wet pavement. Owen had been running a low fever since midday. Nothing serious, the kind of warmth that made him quieter than usual and more inclined to lean against his father's arm. Silas had texted the woman from the date to suggest rescheduling, but she had already confirmed, and Claire had sent a message encouraging him to go. The babysitter who usually covered these evenings had called to say she was stuck on the other side of a flooded underpass. Silas stood in the hallway with Owen already in his coat and hat, and thought, for approximately 30 seconds, about the full weight of the decision. Then he picked up Owen's small backpack, tucked the stuffed animal Owen called Captain into the front pocket, and said quietly that they were going to have dinner somewhere nice and warm. Owen asked if the lady would be there. Silas said probably yes. Owen asked if she was nice. Silas said he did not know yet. The restaurant was on a side street in Lincoln Square, small, warm, with low lighting, and the smell of something with garlic and onion simmering somewhere in the back. It was exactly the kind of place Silas had been choosing for these evenings. Unpretentious, honest, the kind of room where nobody looked at anyone else's table. He ordered a bowl of tomato soup for Owen and a plate of something simple for himself. Owen was quiet, leaning against the booth, his stuffed animal tucked in the crook of his arm, his eyes at half-mast the way they went when he was fighting sleep but had decided not to admit it. The message came 40 minutes in. Sorry, something came up. Let's reschedule. Silas put the phone face down on the table and looked at the wall for a moment. He was not surprised. He was not even particularly disappointed. What he felt was more like the confirmation of something he had already suspected, arriving on schedule, the way certain inevitabilities do. He asked a passing staff member for the check. Owen had finished his soup and was now asking in a small, hoarse voice if he could have some warm milk because his throat hurt. Silas said yes and asked for that too. He also asked quietly whether the kitchen had anything like children's pain reliever available. The staff member said she would check. The check came before the answer. Silas opened his wallet and felt, with a cold and specific sinking sensation, the reality of how little he had brought. He had grabbed the thin wallet out of habit, the one he kept for these evenings when he was performing the role of a man without resources. His regular wallet, his cards, everything that carried the weight of his real life were at home. He had a secondary card, but when the server ran it, she came back quiet and apologetic and said it had been declined. The account linked to it had never had much on it, and he had not thought to check it. He sat very still for a moment. Owen had his eyes closed, his head resting against the corner of the booth. Silas asked the server in a low voice whether he could step out to his car. He knew as he said it that there was nothing in the car. He was not sure, in that moment, whether he was still playing a role or living one. She had been watching him for most of the evening. Not intrusively. She was good at being present in a room without drawing attention to herself, a skill she had been refining for years. But she had noticed him when he came in, partly because of the child, and partly because of the way he moved. There was something careful about it. Something that suggested a person who had learned to take up exactly the space he needed, and not a fraction more. She had watched him check his phone when the message arrived. She had watched the expression on his face not change, which told her more than any expression would have. She had watched him turn and look at the sleeping child and do whatever internal arithmetic people do when they are deciding how much of their dignity they can afford to spend. Her name was Audrey Whitmore. She was 28 years old. She was wearing a dark green uniform that belonged to the restaurant, and her hair was pulled back, and she had not introduced herself as anything other than one of the evening staff. That was, as it had been on other occasions, entirely deliberate. She picked up the check from the counter near the server's station before anyone else could take it back. She folded several bills from her own pocket, not a great sum but what she had on hand, and walked to his table. She did not make a production of it. She set the bills on the edge of the table and said, in a voice low enough that only he could hear, that he should take care of the little one and not worry about the rest tonight. He looked up. The moment their eyes met, something happened that Audrey had not expected, and could not immediately name. It was not the simple shock of a stranger's attention. It was more like the particular sensation of recognizing something without being able to say what it was you were recognizing. He said, immediately, that he could not accept that. She did not argue with him. She only looked at Owen, still asleep, still curled against the seat, his small chest rising and falling. And then she said that a father should not have to feel helpless when his child needed something. The sentence went into Silas like a key into a lock. Not because it was pitying. It was not. It was direct and quiet, and it named exactly the thing he had been feeling, the particular vertigo of wanting to provide and being, in that specific moment, unable to. He had never felt that vertigo before in his adult life. He had not expected how much it could hurt. He accepted the money. He did not know what else to do. Owen woke as the warm milk arrived, and Audrey stayed near the table for another few minutes because the boy had looked at her with immediate and unguarded curiosity and asked whether she liked rainy days. She had told him that she liked them better when she was indoors. He had thought about that and said that was smart. She had folded a paper napkin into the shape of a rabbit and given it to him, and he had received it like something precious. Silas watched all of this. He had seen women try to charm his son before. It was usually visible as effort. This was not effort. This was simply a person who was comfortable with children because she was comfortable with honesty, and children, more than anyone, could tell the difference. Before they left, Silas told her he would return the money. She told him it was not necessary. He said it was, to him. He drove home through the rain with Owen asleep in the back seat. He turned off the radio. He kept both hands on the wheel. Something about the evening had rearranged a small thing inside him, and he was trying to understand what it was. He arrived home, put Owen to bed, and sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The next morning he did what he always did when something did not add up. He looked closer. He had noticed things about her that did not fit the frame. The posture, the way she processed the room. The choice of words, quiet as they were, precise in a way that required more than an ordinary education. The instinct she had shown in lowering her voice, in keeping his dignity intact, in reading the situation without having it explained to her. He asked a member of his staff to do some quiet research on the restaurant, on the ownership structure, on any individuals connected to the operation by the last name, Whitmore. The results came back before lunch. He stood at his office window for a long time after reading them. Audrey Whitmore was the chief executive of Whitmore Hospitality Group, a company that managed a collection of upscale hotels and restaurants across the Midwest, including the small Lincoln Square establishment where she had given him her last dollars the night before. She was 28 years old. She had taken over the company from her father at 25 and had expanded it significantly. He asked for more. What came back was something he had not expected. She did this regularly. The practice was known to her inner circle, but almost no one else. She would take shifts at one of her own locations, working as regular staff, and she would observe. She said it was quality control. The people who knew her best said the real reason was something else. She had been in a serious relationship until 2 years ago. The man had been attentive, considerate, and, as it turned out, primarily interested in what her last name opened for him professionally. When she discovered this, she had ended things quietly and efficiently, the way she did everything. But something in her had shifted. She no longer trusted the warmth that powerful people received simply for being powerful. She wanted to see how people behaved when they had no idea who she was. Silas sat with that information for a very long time. He thought about himself, dressing down for blind dates and driving old cars and leaving his real wallet at home. He thought about her, putting on a plain uniform and pulling her hair back and disappearing into the ordinary. Two people, both hurt by the same general wound, finding their way to the same general solution from opposite directions. The thought did not comfort him the way he might have expected. It complicated everything. Because if she found out that he also had been hiding who he was, she would have every reason to feel exactly the way he would have felt in her position. Like the whole thing had been a stage set. Like the warmth she had shown him had been offered to a character rather than a person. Owen, meanwhile, had been talking about the woman from the restaurant every day. He said she had kind eyes. He said the rabbit she made from the napkin was the best rabbit he had ever seen. He said he wanted to make her a drawing. Silas told him that was a nice idea. Owen made the drawing that same afternoon. It showed 3 people standing under an umbrella. The tallest one was his father. The smallest one was himself. The one in the middle was a woman. Silas folded it carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. 3 weeks later, his company's charitable arm organized a morning event for a family resource center on the north side. Silas attended every year, always without announcement, always in simple clothes, always doing actual work, setting up tables, distributing food, helping with logistics. He did not expect to see her there. She was in a corner near the serving tables when he arrived, wearing plain clothes, talking to one of the children with the same unhurried attention she had shown Owen in the restaurant. She looked up when the door opened, and they stood looking at each other for a moment across the noise of the room. Owen was beside him. The boy saw her, made a sound of pure delight, and covered the distance between them at something close to a run. She knelt to meet him. They spent 3 hours in the same space that morning, and it was the most natural conversation Silas had experienced in years, because it was not a conversation. It was 2 people working alongside each other and speaking in the gaps between tasks, without the scaffolding of a formal setting. She told him she came to things like this when she could. He told her the same. Neither of them said why. At the end of the morning, Owen produced the drawing from the pocket of his jacket, where he had been keeping it since Silas mentioned, 3 days earlier, that they might see the woman from the restaurant again. He presented it with both hands. Audrey took it and looked at it for a long time without speaking. 3 people, under an umbrella. The smallest one was Owen. The middle one was her. She folded it the way you fold something you intend to keep. Silas looked at his son and felt something open up in his chest that was almost unbearable in its sweetness. They began exchanging messages after that. Practical ones at first. She asked how Owen's cough had cleared up. He sent her a photograph of the napkin rabbit, which Owen had installed in a place of honor on his bookshelf. She replied with a short sentence that was almost a joke, and held onto it longer than the words warranted. Neither of them pushed. But neither of them was letting go either. Silas composed messages explaining his real circumstances, and deleted every one before sending. He told himself he was waiting for the right moment. The truth was simpler. He was afraid of watching something that had grown slowly and genuinely get pulled up by the roots before it had a chance to become whatever it was becoming. Audrey across town had a similar awareness of a door she had been keeping slightly open without quite deciding to open it fully. She could feel something asymmetric in the shape of his life, could tell there was more than what he offered. She had her own reasons for not pressing. Whitmore Hospitality was sponsoring a charity gala for one of Chicago's premier children's hospitals that November. Audrey would appear at the event as herself, chief executive, host, public-facing representative of the group's philanthropic work. It was not the kind of evening she looked forward to, but she understood its necessity. She did not know that Silas Bennett was the event's primary anonymous benefactor, and had been for several years. She did not know that the hospital's board had finally, after years of respecting his preference for discretion, asked him to allow a public acknowledgement. He had agreed to let them say his name. He had not anticipated the particular geometry of the room he was walking into. The evening arrived cold and clear, with the river black and glittering below the bridge near the hotel entrance. Owen sat in the back seat, in a small charcoal suit he had been deeply pleased about, and asked twice whether the event would have good food. Silas told him probably yes. Owen asked if a certain person would be there. Silas said he did not know. That was not quite true. The gala occupied the grand ballroom of a hotel on the river. Chandelier light fell across 300 guests in formal wear. The hospital had decorated the walls with drawings made by its young patients, and somehow, this made the extravagance feel less like excess and more like tenderness. Audrey Whitmore arrived in a black gown with a neckline cut in a deep V, understated and precise. Her hair was down. Her posture was the posture of someone who occupied space without apology. Several people turned as she entered. She acknowledged them with the measured warmth of long practice, and made her way toward the event coordinator. She did not see Silas because he was still backstage when she arrived. She took her seat in the second row and reviewed the evening's program. The opening remarks were brief. Then the hospital's director stepped to the podium and began a longer acknowledgement, speaking of the quiet and sustained generosity of one individual whose contributions over the past several years had funded an entire pediatric cardiac wing, equipment upgrades, and a research fellowship. A person, the director said, who had asked for nothing in return and had declined every offer of public recognition until tonight. Audrey listened without particular attention. This was the part of galas where someone's name was read out, and the room applauded, and life continued. The name that came through the microphone was Silas Bennett. She heard it the way you hear something that is simultaneously familiar and impossible. She looked up. And then Silas walked out from the side of the stage, and the room that she had been sitting in with perfect composure became, for several seconds, a very strange place. He was in a dark tuxedo, standing straight, his expression contained in the way his expressions always were. He looked the way a person looked when they were holding something steady by choice rather than by a temperament. He looked out at the room. He found her. The entire architecture of the past several weeks reorganized itself in a single moment. Every conversation, the restaurant in the rain, the charity morning, the messages, the drawing, the three people under the umbrella tata. Audrey was aware, distantly, that the room was applauding. She was aware that her hands were folded in her lap with somewhat more force than usual. She was aware that she was not applauding. Silas gave a short address. He spoke about the hospital, about what it had meant to him personally, about Owen's brief respiratory difficulties when he was very young, and the care that had made that easier. He thanked the staff, and the board, and the donors. He said nothing about himself. When he stepped down from the stage, the evening carried on around both of them, as if nothing significant had happened. They found each other in a corridor off the main hall, away from the event staff and the circulating guests. Owen was with the children's area near the back of the venue, supervised and content. It was just the two of them in a hallway that smelled of fresh flowers and cold air from a nearby exit. Audrey spoke first. Her voice was level. She asked him if any part of what he had told her about himself was true. He said all of it was true. He said that the one part he had not told her was the financial part, and that he had done this for reasons that had nothing to do with her specifically, reasons that preceded her entirely. She asked him to explain. He did. He told her about the blind dates, about the pattern he had watched repeat itself too many times, about the decision he had made in exhaustion rather than strategy. He told her about Owen's question regarding why none of the women ever stayed for ice cream a second time. He told her that when he met her, he had not been trying to test her. He had been trying, for the first time in a long time, simply to exist in a room with someone without the money making it strange. She listened without interrupting. Then she said something that stopped him. She said that she had not been entirely honest either. She told him about the uniform. About the practice she had developed over the past 2 years of working shifts at her own properties without announcing herself. She told him why, and as she said the words aloud, she felt the particular vulnerability of naming a wound that you have been carrying in private. Silas was quiet for a moment. Then he said softly that they had both been doing the same thing. She looked at him. And there it was, the recognition she had felt in the restaurant on the rainy evening, but clearer now, and more frightening. Because this was the part where it could have resolved. Where they could have laughed at the coincidence and moved toward each other. But she had a wall that had not finished deciding whether to come down. And she told him that. She said the problem was not that he was wealthy. The problem was the feeling of having opened something real and then discovering the circumstances had been managed. That what she had responded to, the slight helplessness, the quiet pride of a father trying to hold things together, had been, at least partially, a costume, even if she had been wearing one too. He had no answer that felt adequate. He knew she was right in the way partial truths can be right. He also knew that the vertigo at the table, the genuine helplessness, the weight of his son's face against the booth, none of that had been performed. He had not planned to run out of money. He had not arranged for the date to cancel. He had not manufactured the look in Owen's half-asleep eyes. But she had already gathered herself back to her public shape and was moving down the corridor, and the evening, which had been full of light and organization and good work, had gone quiet for both of them in a way that neither of them had wanted. Owen appeared at the end of the hallway, walking carefully in his small suit, holding a piece of paper that one of the hospital's young patients had given him, looking between his father and Audrey with the precise expression of a child who understands that something important is wrong. On the drive home, he rested his head against the window. After a while, he asked his father whether he had made the lady sad. Silas said that grown-ups sometimes made each other sad by mistake. Owen considered this. Then he said that when he made someone sad by mistake, he tried to fix it. Silas said he knew. He said Owen was better at that than most people. The days that followed had texture to them. Not peaceful, textured. The silence of two people who have each retreated to their own side of a misunderstanding, and are not certain how to cross back without losing something. Silas did not reach out. He had said what he could in the corridor. He understood that pressing before she was ready would only confirm the wrong thing. Audrey found herself returning again and again to the same image, the restaurant in the rain. The way he had looked when the card was declined. Not performing humiliation, just honest. A man in an ordinary coat at a small table with his sick child, doing what he could with what he had. She was not wrong that the circumstances had been constructed. But she was smart enough to know that constructed circumstances could still contain real things. She kept the drawing Owen had made in the drawer beside her bed, where she kept things that mattered. The Children's Hospital held a small reception several days later for the event volunteers and major donors. Informal, mid-morning coffee and light food in one of the smaller meeting rooms. Audrey was on the invitation list in her official capacity. She almost did not go. She went. Silas was there with Owen, who had insisted on coming because he had another drawing he wanted to deliver. Owen had been very specific about this. He had worked on it for 2 days. He would not tell his father what it looked like. When Owen saw Audrey across the room, he went to her without hesitation. She knelt to receive him, the way she had the first time. He hugged her with the complete commitment of a child who has decided something. Then he held up the drawing with both hands. It was not the umbrella picture this time. This one showed 3 hands. A large hand on the left, a small hand in the middle, a woman's hand on the right. All 3 hands were connected. Surrounding them, in Owen's careful 6-year-old script, were tiny stars. Audrey looked at it for a long moment. Her throat tightened. Owen said, in his clear and unhurried voice, the sentence he had been preparing. He said that she was the first person who had ever given his dad money without asking what his dad had. The room did not go silent. There were other conversations, other people, coffee being poured somewhere to the left. But in the small circle of the 3 of them, the words landed the way only a child's words can. Without armor, without agenda, without any awareness of what it costs to be that honest. Audrey looked at the drawing. She looked at Owen. Then she looked at Silas, who was standing a few feet away, and there was nothing on his face except the truth of all of it. The exhaustion, the hope he had stopped trusting himself to feel, the particular fear of a father who has watched his son begin to attach to someone and knows that any loss will not fall on himself alone. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said that Owen was right. He said that the money had never mattered. But the fact that she had not asked had mattered more than he had known how to tell her. He said that he had spent years being assessed and appraised in ways he could not control, and that in the restaurant on that rainy night she had looked at him and seen a person, and that was not something he had been prepared for. He said that he was sorry for not telling her sooner, that the timing had come from fear, not strategy. That whatever she decided, he wanted her to know that everything she had been responding to was real. That the man she had seen in the restaurant had not been a performance. He had been, in fact, more truly himself in that restaurant than he had been in years. Audrey looked at him for a long time. Then she said quietly that she owed him a version of the same honesty. She said that the woman he had met in the uniform had not been performing either. That she had come to prefer that version of herself, the one without the title, without the boardroom, without all of the careful professional scaffolding, because it was the only version she still trusted. And that in the restaurant on that rainy evening she had felt, for the first time in a long time, like someone who was being kind simply because it was right. Not because she was being watched. Not because it served any purpose. Just because a father and his sick child were sitting at a table in the rain, and she had something she could give. She said that was a feeling she had almost forgotten. Owen, who had been listening to all of this with his drawing still held in both hands and his eyes moving between the 2 adults, said simply that it seemed like they both needed to stop being so worried. This produced, from both of them, an involuntary and genuine laugh. The kind that comes from somewhere below thought. The kind that releases something. Audrey crouched down again and looked at the 3 hands in the drawing. She asked Owen very seriously whether he thought his father was capable of doing better. Owen nodded with a firmness that allowed no ambiguity. She looked up at Silas. The thing that passed between them in that moment did not need a name. It was not a declaration. It was not a resolution. It was simply the feeling of 2 people who have been tired for a long time, recognizing that they are tired of the same things and might, possibly, be less tired together. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, the 3 of them had breakfast at a small table by the window, in a hotel that happened to belong to Whitmore Hospitality Group. The light came through the glass in long pale lines. Owen was working through a stack of pancakes with the methodical focus he brought to anything he considered important. He was telling a story about something that had happened in school, something involving a caterpillar and a misunderstanding about whose lunch bag it had gotten into, and he told it with the full dramatic investment of a person who understood that the telling of a story was not separate from the living of it. Silas listened. Audrey listened. They were both holding coffee cups. Outside, Chicago moved in its usual way. Relentless, indifferent, full of people carrying their own weights through their own mornings. But at this particular table, in this particular light, nobody was performing anything. Nobody was testing anything. Nobody needed to. Silas looked across Owen's head at Audrey, and she met his eyes, and what he saw there was something simple and very hard-won. She was not looking at a balance sheet. She was not looking at a name on a building. She was looking at him, and she was staying.